So the BMT-JS is a JS library, and it's an acronym for binary marker tree. With that, you can splice up the data into 32 bytes of segments, and you can hash it until it's swarm hash, basically. So everything that you would upload to your B client, it returns you a swarm reference, with which you can retrieve the file later from the swarm network. And with this library, you can, without the B client, you can calculate this swarm reference of any file, of any data, and it can be used also to sort out the segments, the required segments for cheap inclusion proofs. So the binary marker tree itself, you can imagine like a pyramid, and the bottommost level is the data level, which is spliced up into 32 bytes segments. And the algorithm itself takes the segments in pairs. So the 64 bytes, so 2 multiplied by 32, is the input to a hashing algorithm that results in 32 bytes. And that's gonna be the level above. And it does until you have only one 32 bytes segment. It's kind of a reference. On Swarm, the smallest amount of data that you can retrieve is 4 kilobytes. It's called chunks. And the chunks can have this 4 kilobytes of data, and if it's lesser, then it's just padded until the end with zeros. And if your data is larger than 4 kilobytes, you have more chunks, basically. So the chunks also have their own levels. There are the data chunks at the bottommost level, and above that the intermediate chunks. And the top of the pyramid, you will have the root chunk. That's address, the chunk address will be basically the file address. And above the data chunk level, you have intermediate chunks that basically just include chunk references to the bottom level, to the closest bottom level of that tree. And yeah, that's it. And you can leverage this attribute of the BMT hashing, because you can provide cheap inclusion proofs just providing these sister segments of any arbitrary 32 byte segments of the data. So, for example, you have 8 gigabytes of data, you have to just provide lesser than 1 kilobyte of sister segments that you can upload, for example, to a smart contract to prove something. Under this file address, there is this data. So you can use for various things this library. For example, Swarm CLI is a required feature for uploading just the changes of a file directory. For example, you are developing a front-end application and you want to just upload and pay for the differences. I mean, compared to what you uploaded before. And for that, you don't have to interact with the B client as I mentioned, because you just calculate the swarm hashes of the files, of every files of that directory, and compare it to the manifest listed files. Because the manifest basically a directory list of the files live on Swarm. And if you have some different Swarm hash in that manifest, you just change it and update it, and you basically uploaded just the difference from the previous version. And then you also have opportunity, of course, they create some logic in smart contracts around any file And then you can also create a logic in the smart contract and use the inclusion proof feature of this library to prove whether any arbitrary data is subsumed under one swarm reference, but this data has to have random access. And then the storage incentive feature also will use this capability. And last but not least, it also can be used in a full JavaScript implementation in browser of this Swarm client later, because the BMT algorithm itself is a crucial component of that client. So the FedRAP protocol, which is basically the Fair Data protocol, aims at this smart contracts usage of the inclusion proofs with binary Merkle trees. And we're preparing now currently a library called BSON, which will be completely JSON compatible serialization for exactly this use case. So every attribute you can prove in 32 bytes of resolution, and you can just serialize in one way a JSON object. And it's gonna have a separate API representation of the object that also can be proved in smart contract, but not necessarily, and the data implementation section. So these two parts can be totally separate from each other. And it's gonna be really cool.